The covenant with Abraham.
Memory text. But Abram said, Lord God, what will you give me, seeing I go childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus? Genesis 15:2.
God's first covenant with the people of the earth was made with Noah. Now God's second covenant is with Abraham. It too includes all the nations, and it is also everlasting. We will see how Abraham's life has fear, joy, and many passions. The people around him, including Sarah, Hagar, Ishmael, and even evil Sodom with Lot, are all a loving concern.
Here we are told of God's change to the name of Abram. Where Abram hinted at nobility, Abraham means father of many nations. We catch a glimpse of the real beginning of the future Messiah through Abraham.
The faith of Abraham.
Genesis 15:3-6. Then Abram said, Look, you have given me no offspring, indeed one born in my house is my heir. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, This one shall not be your heir, but one who will come from your own body shall be your heir. Then he brought him outside and said, Look now toward heaven, and count the stars if you are able to number them. And he said to him, So shall your descendants be. And he believed in the Lord, and he accounted it to him for righteousness.
God assures Abram that he will have a son from his body that will be his heir, and Abram believes it. Abram knows this is not a blessing because of anything he has done. His righteousness is through God's righteousness. Abram is now fully aware that true salvation is not from pagan practices, not what he does, but what God does.
Genesis 15:8-11, And he said, Lord God, how shall I know that I will inherit it? So he said to him, Bring me a 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old female goat, a 3-year-old ram, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. Then he brought all these to him and cut them in two, down the middle, and placed each piece opposite the other, but he did not cut the birds in two. And when the vultures came down on the carcasses, Abram drove them away.
God tells Abram how his descendants will spend 400 years in slavery, but then be freed to return to the promised land. The promises to Abram are presented in an extraordinary fashion. Genesis 15:17. And it came to pass, when the sun went down and it was dark, that behold, there appeared a smoking oven and a burning torch that passed between those pieces.
Then, God explains to Abram how the boundaries of the future inheritance of his offspring will be vast, beginning in the land of Canaan, but spreading out. Eventually, this land will expand for the whole world to find salvation. Like Abraham, we know that our salvation is not by our works. Ephesians 2:8-9, For by grace are ye saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast.
Abraham's doubts.
Genesis 16:3-4. Then Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar her maid, the Egyptian, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan. So he went into Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress became despised in her eyes.
We wonder what Abram may have been thinking. Perhaps he listened to Sarai thinking they could help the promise along. After all, it had been many years now since God promised Abram a son. They were both getting older, and having children now must have been considered impossible.
It might have been customary to have children through a hired servant. Sarai was obviously very frustrated in offering Hagar. Now Hagar did have a son, and perhaps both Abram and Sarai thought this was going to make things right. Quickly we see how it turns out. God made it clear that this son was not the one. Sarai, after getting her wish, realizes this was not going to work. Hagar was not a free woman. Anyone born of a servant was destined to remain a servant.
Sarai seems to put some blame on Abram. And well, she should. Abram had a choice. Abram could also make an excuse that he was helping fulfill the promise. Didn't we just hear Adam and Eve play the blame game as well?
Abram trying to help this promise be fulfilled may show that he had lost at least some faith in God's original plan.
Eventually, Hagar is forced to flee into the wilderness with her child. What a sad thing for this faithful man to see and do. Abram now knew how his decision was not right.
Genesis 16:11-12. And the angel of the Lord said to her, Behold, you are with child, and you shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has heard your affliction. He shall be a wild man, his hand shall be against every man, and every man's hand against him. And he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren.
Why is it so easy for us to have the same lack of faith that Abram had here?
When we try and take matters into our hands, without either waiting on or trusting God, we make things worse. Our decisions affect the future. Yes, God can bring good things out of our lack of faith in these instances, but we bear the consequences in the future.
The sign of the Abrahamic covenant.
Genesis 17:9-11. And God said to Abraham, As for you, you shall keep my covenant, you and your descendants after you throughout their generations. My covenant which you shall keep, between me and you and your descendants after you. Every male child among you shall be circumcised, and you shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskins, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you.
Even though Abram might have shown lack of faith, God once again pulls him back with the promises. The covenant is sealed now with a blood ritual, circumcision, foreshadowing the shedding of blood for the sacrifice of sins.
Romans 4:1. And he received the sign of circumcision, a seal of the righteousness of the faith which he had while still uncircumcised, that he might be the father of all those who believe, though they are uncircumcised, that righteousness might be imputed to them also.
All sacrifices led to the final, perfect one, Jesus Christ, whose death imputed salvation on everyone who believes.
So now the promises made to Abram are not just physical blessings, but a future spiritual blessing from the coming Messiah. God uses this time to change Abram and Sarai's names. Genesis 17:5-15-16. No longer shall your name be called Abram, but your name shall be Abraham, for I have made you a father of many nations. Then God said to Abraham, As for Sarai your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. And I will bless her and also give you a son by her, then I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations, kings of peoples shall be from her.
Abraham means father of many nations. Sarah means the princess of many.
God also tells Abraham that Sarah will bear a son, and his name is to be Isaac. What does Isaac mean? Laughter. How fitting is this?
We know in the future Sarah will laugh with doubt as to her having a child at her age. This laughter shows how she and Abraham must have struggled with doubt, but for the most part remain faithful.
We too struggle with doubts in our spiritual journeys, just like Abraham. Continuing to remember how God always keeps His promises can help us stay faithful. Even when we fall, prayer, fellowship, and Bible reading can lift us back up.
The Son of Promise.
Genesis 18:1-5. Then the Lord appeared to him by the terebinth trees of Mamre, as he was sitting in the tent door in the heat of the day. So he lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing by him, and when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them, and bowed himself to the ground, and said, "My Lord, if I have now found favor in your sight, do not pass on by your servant. Please let a little water be brought, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. And I will bring a morsel of bread, that you may refresh your hearts. After that you may pass by, inasmuch as you have come to your servant." They said, "Do as you have said."
We do not know if Abraham knew these strangers were heaven sent. But he was gladly eager to offer them hospitality. It shows the character of Abraham as he meets their needs.
Hebrews 13:2. Do not forget to entertain strangers, for by so doing some have unwittingly entertained angels.
During the meal that Abraham had provided, he is told in person that he will have a child with Sarah. Sarah has hid herself, probably out of curiosity, to see what this sudden meeting is all about.
Genesis 18:13-15. And the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh, saying, Shall I surely bear a child, since I am old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time I will return to you, according to the time of life, and Sarah shall have a son." But Sarah denied it, saying, "I did not laugh," for she was afraid. And he said, "No, but you did laugh."
How shocked Sarah must have been to be a strange part of this meeting. Her laughing is recorded, and it is the last word given on this promise. Sarah would be forever reminded of this as her son was named Isaac, one who laughs.
Laughter also goes along with joy. Abraham and Sarah were given great joy in this event.
We have already read how we are to entertain strangers. Abraham fulfilled his duty. How about us? Are we fulfilling our duty to strangers? Our actions should be so that we do not even think about it. Our Christian love should be automatic. We might not even remember what we were doing was helping strangers. But Jesus told us this in a parable.
Matthew 25:40. The king will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me."
Lot in Sodom. As the meeting with the 3 strangers ends, Abraham is made aware of what God is going to do to Sodom.
Genesis 18:22-23. Then the men turned away from there and went toward Sodom, but Abraham still stood before the Lord. And Abraham came near and said, "Would you also destroy the righteous with the wicked?"
Abraham immediately feels a responsibility towards Lot. Lot is family. God knows this, as Abraham starts to bargain with God. How bold Abraham must have been to start this conversation.
His boldness shows he knows God on a truly personal level, and trusts in Him completely. We can look at this bargaining as a prayer. Abraham, in bargaining, is offering up a petition to God to save Lot and his family.
That is why we cannot really call this bargaining. After all, Abraham has nothing of his to offer. So he offers what he now believes wholeheartedly. That God is a just and loving God.
God sees this and assures Abraham that He will not destroy the righteous. And He even goes further. He will give Lot's family a chance to escape this judgment, even as Abraham must know that Lot and his family cannot truly be righteous. Abraham's last plea is that if as few as 10 righteous people are there, Sodom should not be destroyed.
We are made aware of the sick and evil ways that Lot has learned and accepted in Genesis 19. The 2 angels sent to warn and save them are treated in a vile and deprived way.
God answers Abraham's prayer in a most generous way, as there were only 4 people found willing to be saved: Lot, his wife, and 2 daughters. We can assume they were far from righteous.
Notice how Lot's sons-in-law remained and were destroyed. Abraham must have been at least somewhat heartbroken at this news. And how much more so when he learns the fate of Lot's wife.
3 people made it out of Sodom alive. Once again in the book of Genesis, we have a judgment and destruction. The days of Eden are now distant and not remembered by the inhabitants of the earth.
God's perfect creation keeps going in reverse. This foreshadows the end-time destruction. The call will go out, but many will not listen. They will long for the evil ways of this world.
It can only make us think of how glorious Christ's return will be for us in the new earth. All evil is destroyed and we return to the perfection of Eden.
And now the last night of Sodom was approaching. Already the clouds of vengeance cast their shadows over the devoted city. But men perceived it not. While angels drew near on their mission of destruction, men were dreaming of prosperity and pleasure. The last day was like every other that had come and gone. Evening fell upon a scene of loveliness and security. A landscape of unrivaled beauty was bathed in the rays of the declining sun. The coolness of eventide had called forth the inhabitants of the city, and the pleasure-seeking throngs were passing to and fro, intent upon the enjoyment of the hour.